Well, welcome everybody to Islington Reads. We're very excited to have everybody here tonight to hear Madeline Martin talk about her fantastic book, The Booklover's Library. Um, we're again very excited that everybody is joining us from all over the place. We've got people in the out west and in the Toronto area, and we've got people down in Florida. So it's exciting to have all sorts of people zooming in from all over. Um, as you all know, Islington Reads is a community a community book club that's open to all ages, genders, and identities. And Maya tasked me with looking for a book that had a real community focus for it because there was a merger of the two churches into their community. So we were looking for a read that talks about community. And to me, when I first read Booklover's Library, I thought this is a perfect read. There's a lot of community going on, a lot of people that don't know each other that have to come together. So I thought this would be a perfect a match. So Eden is on my screen as well. Eden is a star employee of mine. Uh, she's my director of marketing and events. Got that, Eden? Director of marketing events. And before she joined me, she volunteered with me. We met during the pandemic, kind of like how Islington Reads started up was during the pandemic, and that's how we met. And she had various transitions, and she asked if she could join my team. So I must say I am beyond delighted to have Eden on board. But before she joined my team, she's had a storied career. But one of them was working for Harper Collins, and that is where she actually met Madeline Martin and worked on a couple of her books. And I see Eden's got a couple of books in the background. So The Librarian Spy and The Last Bookshop in London were the two books that actually Eden worked with Madeline on. So it's kind of exciting to have the book community come together and coming full circle with Eden here tonight to also ask Madeline some questions. So that's why Eden is here tonight, because of the whole connection. It's amazing the power of books. So now I'm going to introduce us to our guest tonight. So Madeline, thank you again for joining us. Madeline lives in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. She has a husband, two wonderful daughters who she calls minions, oldest minion and youngest minion, I believe.
Right.
And she has a very spoiled cat. I think you just got one, right?
I have two now.
You've
So
got two
they
cats.
multiply like that.
Well, that is great. So we're thrilled you're here. Before Madeline became a writer, full-time writer, she actually worked in corporate America. She got her business administration degree from Flagler College. And it was when she was on maternity leave with oldest Minion that she started writing. And we're so glad that you did. She has written 31 books that are in series, and then we've got the four novels that are the sort of the World War II ones. So she's a prolific writer, all very, very different. But what pulls it all together is Madeline loves history and historical details and going down rabbit holes and learning all sorts of interesting, neat bits and pieces and facts. So I guess it kind of started, I think somewhere I read that it was the Outlander series that got you started into wanting to
Right,
sort of write
exactly.
into the historical novels. So it is great. It sounds like you get very little sleep from all accounts. You,
Yeah, pretty
you are
much.
you don't get a lot of sleep because you're always got something on the go. You love to work out, and you're just a very busy writer.
Yeah.
And as you said, you've got some best selling books on the New York Times. And the one thing about Booklover's Library that is very exciting, I don't know how many of you know, but it has been listed onto the Goodreads best historical fiction book of the year. So if you're on Goodreads and have a chance to vote, please go out and vote for this book for Madeline because it really is something special. So,
Thank
with,
you.
yeah. So without further ado, we're going to pass the floor over to Madeline. She's going to tell us a little bit about Book Lovers Library, and then from there, Eden and I will do a breakout, and we'll have the lots of questions. So we have a ton of questions that were submitted. So I doubt we'll be able to open up the floor till the at the end of it, but We shall see if we get through all of them quickly. Then we'll have a chance to open up the floor to additional questions. So without further ado, Madeline, we'll pass it over to you, and you can tell us a little bit about your wonderful book.
Thank you. I really appreciate the wonderful introduction to Sarah. Thank you. And Eden, it's such a treat getting to see you as well. So thank you for joining tonight also. And thank you all for taking time out of your evening to come here and chat with me about my book. So the Booklover's Library is basically a heartwarming homefront read set at the cusp of World War II in Nottingham, England, about a widowed mother who has to send her daughter away during the children's evacuation in England. And she starts working at this lovely little shop called the Booklover's Library, which was based on the actual lending library called the Booklover's Library that existed back in that time. And it is very much about community. That's something that I've always really been drawn to, are these wonderful bookish communities. I feel like readers are just some of the most intelligent and empathetic people in the world. And what better community to really draw together than people who are so like-minded in that regard and have such open minds and open hearts and coming together with the love of books. And so that really is something that I've enjoyed embracing with my stories, and especially with the Booklover's Library. And even with the Booklover's Library itself, some things that kind of drew me to write with that particular setting was, first of all, to kind of offset from that heaviness of a mother sending her daughter away during the war. But as I started to research the Booklover's Library a little bit more, the real one, I learned that they had all of these really quirky patrons who came in and frequented the store. And I thought, oh, these would make really wonderful characters in the book. And so I used a lot of real people as inspiration for these characters who come into the store. And this book was also set during a time where the marriage bar was still in place, which meant that when women got married, they had to basically give up their jobs to become full-time wives and mothers. And apparently, it was said that women who worked for the Booklover's Library had statistically longer engagements than women in other areas of employment because they loved their jobs so much they didn't want to give it up. Oh, I think you might be muted, Sarah.
I'm just unmuting myself. Sorry about that. Thank you. Well, that's a great introduction to the into your book. So that is great. So I think Eden is going to jump in with possibly the first question, and then we'll sort of alternate between the two of us.
Okay.
Amazing. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So thank you all to the Islington Reads community for having me tonight. I really, really appreciate being here. It's great to get the chance to speak with you all and to see you again, Madeline, and of course discuss with this wonderful community. So Madeline, I had a lot of fun coming up with some of these questions. There's quite the list. First off, I wanted to ask if you can tell us a little bit more about Mrs. Boots and the real Booklover's Library. There were just so many little tidbits throughout the story that I want to pick out a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. So Jessie Boots owned the Boots Chemist, which is basically just a pharmacy that is spread all throughout England. And, it's actually funny. They had the first 24/7 pharmacy in Piccadilly in the 1920s, which I think is amazing because you really think about that being such a contemporary sort of invention. And really, it was like almost 100 years ago. And so when Jessie Boots married his wife, she was the daughter of a bookstore owner. And she said, wouldn't it be lovely if we got to have a lending library set inside of the chemist shop and people could borrow from one location, they could return in another location. And so one thing that's kind of interesting about this particular time period in history, like in the 20s and 30s, is that you started to have a lot of novels that were really coming out. You had a lot of romances, a lot of mysteries. That's when Agatha Christie had her first debut with The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And people could not get enough. And, it was one of those things where the libraries didn't really carry a lot of novels. They carried more reference materials. And there was a lot of people, sort of like, Mr. Beard, who thought that all of these mysteries and romances were essentially degrading the intellect of the average English citizen because they were no longer reading these classics. They were reading these shocking novels. And so I really kind of wanted to play with that in this book as well. So when they started to design these lending libraries, and the reason why they were so popular is that it was expensive to purchase books. And with a lending library, you could essentially purchase an annual subscription for what would be the cost of a paperback novel. And a lot of these lending libraries were kind of tucked in dreary, dismal locations. They were kind of shoved away in basements, and people would have to like kind of go into these dreary spots to pick out their books. And, with Mr. and Mrs. Boots, they wanted to make it a transformative experience, and they absolutely accomplished just that. So when you walked into a Boots pharmacy, these locations where the Book Lovers Library was located were either all the way at the very back of the store, or it was located oftentimes on the second floor. So when you walked in, all of a sudden the pharmacy fell away behind you, and you were literally transported into a book lover's paradise. You had these thick pile carpets and fresh cut flowers, sunlight streaming in through stained glass windows, and just shelves and shelves of books. And of course, these librarians that were ready at your beck and call to help you curate exactly the list of books that you want. And it really was such a cool thing. In fact, if anybody has their book with them, if you look on this very, very bottom row of the books, you'll see that there's one particular book that has a little eyelet at the very top. And the reason for that is that at the Real Book Lovers Library, when people would check out their book, their token was attached to a ribbon, and it would get threaded through this book, the hole in the book when they checked it out, and they could actually use it as a bookmark. And so all of the books, all the Boots Book Lovers Library books had that little eyelet at the very top of it. And of course, I own a couple copies because I'm a history nerd, and I had to make sure that I bought some so I could see exactly what it looked like. But when they put together the cover for the Book Lovers Library, it was really important to me that they had at least one book that was representative of that.
I was gonna say, before I even got to the point in the novel where that came up, I was like, this is a detail Madeline definitely pushed for on the cover. Which
Yes.
is great.
That is great.
Amazing.
Well,
Thank you.
yes, fascinating, fascinating. So in the author's note, you mentioned the woman who contacted you with the story of running away from a place where she was billeted. I wondered if you have any family wartime stories that appeared either in this book or in any of the other ones you've written.
I don't have any wartime stories. I will say that that woman is now actually living in Canada. And
Oh,
so I received a couple Canadian copies of the book, because I usually will receive a couple copies of the of international translations as well, or not that it's translated, but and so I actually sent her a copy of it as well, so that she could see the part of the book that she really inspired. And so I don't have any personal family stories per se from World War II that inspired any part of the book. But and I don't know if you guys might be getting into this, so I hope I'm not taking any of your questions. But a big part of this book was actually inspired by my personal experience as a single mother, because I did spend several years as a single mother. And, I really wanted to convey that in a lot of my experience with Emma's story. So, not only just talking about the difficulty of being a single parent, because obviously being a single parent is hard, and especially with no family in the area as well. But also, unfortunately, there's like a lot of judgment that single mothers get, even in today's day and age, which is crazy because the divorce rate is like 40%. And that's a lot of single mothers out there. So if you can imagine how bad it is now, how much more inflamed it would have been in the 30s and 40s when it was such an uncommon thing. But also, there's this really beautiful part of being a single parent too, where you are the sole recipient of all of that love and affection, and this wonderfully inseparable bond that just is created between you and your child. And I really wanted to capture that as well. And in fact, Olivia's character is based off of both of my daughters' personalities. The greatest lie I tell myself as a parent is, oh, I'll remember this exact moment forever. I won't. But thankfully, my phone can hold like tens of thousands of pictures. And so I was able to go back and look at those pictures of the girls when they were like 7 and 8 years old. And it's kind of like when you smell a familiar scent and it immediately draws you back into that moment, and you can put yourself in that exact moment. These pictures were just like that, where, I could remember how silly they were and goofy they were, and that unfettered confidence that children just have. And I really used a blend of both of the minions to make Olivia the character that she was. And she would do things and say things that these little girls that are now teenagers and almost adults had done at that age as well.
okay. Well, I'm just going to interject in there because it seems to just build off of this, what you've just mentioned. But so as we know, you're a mother yourself. Was it difficult to write those scenes between Olivia and Emma in particular, making the hard decisions and trying to protect her innocence, and then obviously when she goes missing?
Oh
What
my
did you?
gosh, yes. I mean, y'all, I cried so much writing this book. So if anybody cried reading
We
this book,
cried so
I
much
promise you
reading
I
it.
cried too. I definitely cried too. Especially, and I won't go into too much detail in case if people haven't had a chance to finish reading the book. Just a little funny aside story, because I have a book club that I have in my neighborhood that I go to. And oftentimes I'll be like, oh no, book club is this Thursday. And I'll like grab the book on audio and listen to it really fast to make sure I get it in time. And my
We've
daughter
all
came
been there.
down. Yeah, my daughter came down one day and she goes, "You've been listening to that book like nonstop. Do you have book club this Thursday?" And I was totally busted because I did. Um, so I want to make sure that I'm not doing any spoilers, just in case. But there is one scene where Olivia is trying really, really hard to not cry. And with my youngest, she would always hit the honor roll when she was in elementary school, and my work was right next to her school, and so I would always go for her honor roll assemblies. And it was so bittersweet because obviously I wanted to be there to support her and was so proud of her and wanted to see her with her accomplishment. But every time that I left, she just broke and she would just start bawling. And it was so hard because I had to like pry her away from me and like leave for work with a broken heart. And as she started to get older, she started to try to control her emotions a little bit more. And that was almost more heartbreaking than the times that she would just erupt into tears, because you would see her just like firm up and square her shoulders and try so hard to be brave. And you would see that little moment where she just fractured and her face would crumple and she would just start crying. And you knew that she just couldn't hold it anymore. And so I envisioned her when I was writing a particular scene where Olivia is trying so hard to hold it together and starts crying. And oh my gosh, I bawled so hard writing that scene because all I could see in my head was my youngest in that moment.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I can't. I can't. Um, I'm going to build off of that actually, because I do have a couple other questions about your girls and about the minions. Um, so you really only need to look at my hair color to guess why I screamed when I flipped to page or to chapter, I think it was 32, and discovered the mention of Anne of Green Gables. Of course, a personal childhood favorite of mine. So I was thrilled to see it make it into the book. And building off of what you said about Olivia, it plays a really big role in her journey to becoming a reader. What book, this is a two-part question. What book made you a reader, and what stories were you first excited to share with your girls when they reached the right age?
Oh, that's a great question. So I will say that for me, the first book that I can really remember getting into, and I think this is kind of part of what helped pave the way for why I love historical fiction so much as well, was Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House in the Big Woods series. I can't tell you how many times I have read that series. In fact, um, I used to want to be Laura, although I wanted to be Mary, but I had to come to the conclusion that I was unequivocally Laura. No matter how hard I tried to be good and perfect, I never could be Mary. But when we lived in Germany, the place that we lived on, the Economy, had this beautiful garden in the backyard. And my mom bought me a calico print dress and a bonnet, and I would run around there barefoot, and I was Laura. And they had these cattails that sort of surrounded a little runoff where they had a bunch of water. And I would always soak the cattail, I don't know, whatever it's called, foliage, leaves, whatever, because I wanted to braid it and make it into a sun hat. And it drove them crazy. They're like, please stop, please have your daughter stop putting all of this stuff in our water. And then one more funny little story about it. You know how they would make the maple candy, how they would take the maple syrup and pour it into the snow? Well, spoiler alert, if you take like, the log cabin maple syrup and you put it in your freezer, it will not freeze, but you will make your parents very, very angry. Don't try it. So it's something that I feel
Oh my
like
gosh, I love
really
it.
brought history to life for me in this way that I obviously wanted to live in. And I think that that really was such a huge part of my formative years as far as really loving historical fiction. And I have to say that Anne of Green Gables was also one of those too, because I was such an voracious reader, and I was that weird little girl that was kind of tucked inside of her brain and had the ridiculous vocabulary, and I felt kind of weird because of it. And then I read about Anne Shirley and I realized that I wasn't alone. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about books, is that you can always find a character that connects with your heart and makes you feel like the weird parts of you are actually really special. And for me, Anne of Green Gables did that. And so
I
as
love
far
that.
as the books that I wanted to share with my daughters, it's hard because gosh, they're opinionated. And so it's kind of hard to foist your favorites and that kind of thing onto them. But I will say that I think one of my favorites was the moment that my oldest read Pride and Prejudice. And,
Mm.
she was probably about 15. And the way that I got her to read Pride and Prejudice is both of my girls are really into manga, the
Mm.
cartoon, and they actually made a whole manga series of classics. And so I got Pride and Prejudice in manga form, which like blows my mind that they even had
I
this.
love that.
And I gave it to my daughter, and she's a night owl. And so when I gave it to her, it was in the evening, and she'd been sitting during the day. And so I went to go say goodnight, and she had been reading it. And I walked in, and she goes, "Oh, that Mr. Darcy." And I was like, just wait. And so that morning I woke up and she was still reading the manga. And I walk in there, and she had just finished it, and she looks at me and she goes, "Mr. Darcy." And I said, "I thought you didn't like him." And she goes, "Oh, stop, you know." So that was a really special moment, kind of getting to connect with a love of Pride and Prejudice. And I think that whoever decided to put classics into manga is absolutely a genius.
That's so great. Yeah, I think we can probably all relate with different pieces of that story for sure. Oh my gosh,
Right.
that's awesome. I love it.
There you go. I'll have to look into getting some Pride and Prejudice manga books for the store.
There you
Yeah, I
go.
mean, they're great.
There you go. Okay, so going back into a little bit more historical stuff, how mandatory was it for children that children be sent away to the countryside
So it
and to be
wasn't, oh,
protected?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, no, it's okay.
Did you want to add any more? Because I
No,
didn't.
no, no. Like, and if there were there repercussions if you opted not to send your child?
Okay. So it was not necessarily mandatory. Parents did ultimately have a say. There was a fierce amount of societal pressure, though, and also governmental pressure. There were flyers that would actually say, "If you don't send your children away, you support Hitler." Which I mean is a pretty profound statement. I mean, talk about some parent shaming going on there, right? But then you also had, just like in the book, you had other parents who would look down on the parents that did have their children there. So and even to just kind of talk about sending children away for a little bit. Um, when these children were sent away, their parents took them to the bus or to the school where the bus would pick them up and take them to the train. So they didn't even get to see them off on the train. And if the children left, when the parents were taking them, they didn't know where the children were even going because it had to be kept a secret first for security. They didn't know who their children were going to be living with. And they also didn't even know how long their children were going to be gone for. And if the parents who sent their children away at the start of the war, when they were asked to in September 1939, and they didn't bring the children home until the all clear was given after the war, these children would have been gone for 6 years. Which is just like mind blowing. I mean, I'm divorced. And so when my kids would go to their dad's house for a weekend and come back, I swore that they had lost a tooth and grown 2 inches. I mean, I can't imagine what 6 years would feel like. But then as far as, and then when the kids would actually arrive on location, these poor kids were lined up and they were selected by the people who wanted them. So the pretty little girls went first and the strong, able boys went first. And there were always children who were left behind. And that particular aspect of the Operation Pied Piper, which is what it was called, really stuck with me as well. So it wasn't necessarily illegal to not send your children away. However, you also were placing them at risk. Say for example, in London, when the Blitz was happening and they were being bombed almost every single night for 7 months, you were putting your child at risk to keep them home with you versus sending them away. Of course, sending them away, obviously, if something happens to the parents, that child is now an orphan. I mean, that kind of raises a whole new bucket of problems. But I also will say, too, that I can't imagine something like that ever happening in today's day and age. First of all, we're so much more mobile, I think, as people than they were back then. Back then, where you were born was where you died, and that's where your kids died, and that's where their kids died. And I mean, it's, everybody kind of stayed in that one location. Whereas now, here we are getting to have this wonderful book chat all over, North America, which is really incredible. And so we do have a little bit more of mobility, which gives us a lot more flexibility. But also, I mean, I don't know a parent alive who hasn't pulled up the Predator app on their phone and seen their entire neighborhood light up like Christmas trees. I can't imagine with the access to media and news that we have today that any parent would ever, like, my people would have to pry my children from my cold, dead hands before I let them go and live with a stranger. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So just to further on that, do you know what percentage of children were actually sent away to the countryside?
You know what? I don't. Or if I did, I can't recall that number off the top of my head, but I know that there were, I mean, several million who were moved. And the movement really happened because it was major cities like London, for example, that ultimately would be assumed to be targets, which was assumed correct. And places like Nottingham, because Nottingham had a lot of arms factories. In fact, they made a lot of machine gun parts and shells. And one of the places there, I think it's called Ralph's or something, but it was a bicycle factory. And they actually made the bicycles that people would parachute in on. So these bicycles, you could fold them up, the wheels folded together and the handlebar folded down. It could be attached to the back of a rucksack. And when you jumped out of a plane and had your parachute, you had your foldable bike on your back. And you would land, unfold it, snap a little pin in it, and then you could hop on the bike and you could ride and you could get a lot further from where people had seen the parachutists land for a higher opportunity of being able to escape unseen. And they actually made those folding bikes in Nottingham. So I don't know, I'm a history nerd. That kind of stuff just gets me all excited.
I didn't know that, Madeline. That's so cool.
Isn't it so neat?
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
I
amazing.
can't speak for their comfort, but they were pretty efficient for the most part.
Needs must and all that.
you know.
Um, Playing off of I want to dig more into your research, but I noticed immediately when reading the Booklover's Library that it nods to the mass observation, just as your historical debut, The Last Bookshop in London, did. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how you used it as a source to inform writing both of the novels?
Yeah, so mass observation was this incredible initiative that happened. It actually started before World War II when the king was going to be abdicating his throne to Mary Wallace Simpson, the scandal caused by the American divorcee. And so they wanted people to write down their thoughts and opinions just to kind of get a feel for it, almost kind of like as a social experiment, so to speak. So you had hundreds of people who were writing in these journals and diaries about how they were feeling about the political turmoil that was really happening with everything going on. And this sort of actually segued into the start of World War II. And they said, oh, just keep writing. And so these people wrote all the way through World War II and even after the fact, which has just become an invaluable source of information for people like me who want to find out information about how they lived in that particular time. And it was kind of seen as a bit of a breach of privacy because people were, of course, writing conversations and thoughts and opinions and some juicy drama about their neighbors and friends and family who didn't always necessarily offer their consent to have their conversations detailed out in such a public manner. Especially because sometimes these mass observations would be published in chunks in local newspapers. So I can't even imagine the kind of drama that must have incited. but I'm sure there was probably some fights about that. But so I really enjoyed kind of playing with Mr. Beard's character with that because like I said, it was such an invaluable source of information, not only the firsthand accounts, but also really the thoughts and opinions of how people would react, like and also the weather. So it's so funny how many of the people who were recording their diary entries started off with the weather. And so all of the weather in The Last Bookshop in London is 100% accurate because people were so thorough about it.
How did I not know that? That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's crazy. It was one of those little things, you know what I mean? And so, but playing with Mr. Beard's character and having him working with the mass observation, it really created a really fun way to kind of play with the concept of somebody who was constantly recording everybody's conversations. Like you didn't know what he was writing, but you knew it was about you. And I thought, oh, this is such a fun way to play with it. And I even do have a little sort of tongue-in-cheek nod in there to, oh, well, do you think this would ever be used in a book? Oh, of
Yep.
course not who wants to read about this, you know? And of course, it's great because World War II is such a huge part of the historical fiction genre, and the answer is everyone.
Exactly. How did you access the mass observation? Is there is there a database somewhere? Did you go to a library? How did
There's
you pull
tons
those
of
pieces?
databases everywhere, and there's also chunks that are published. So you might have clusters of chunks that are published about one particular aspect or another, or you'll just have a random selection that are all published together. And I've even had, if you guys have ever read the Underground no, not the Underground Library. So Kate Thompson wrote, oh gosh, it's not called the Underground Library. That's Jennifer Ryan's new one. But Kate Thompson wrote a really wonderful one about,
I'm looking it up. I'm
thank
looking
you.
it up
I
as we
appreciate
speak.
it. So Kate Thompson is just such a completely delightful person. And she and I have had many conversations about books because we both write about them, and also have waxed on poetic way too long about the scent of books and how we love old smelling books, and we'll just sit them and sniff them. And you guys know we've all had book sniffer conversations. And
100%.
and so she actually sent me this really huge volume that she had of a mass observation that was centered around books. And I used a lot of that for the Book Lovers Library. So it's really great because we'll even actually share all of that information together as well. Did you find it?
Another community moment. Yes, it's this book has done incredibly well at the bookshop, so I can't believe I forgot the title, but there are two. There's the Little Wartime Library, and then what's the other one? Hold on. Wartime Book Club.
Yeah.
There you
Those
go.
are both such great books. If you haven't read those, I highly recommend it.
Love that.
Super. So you mentioned to me that you actually went to Nottingham to do some research. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did for the, as background research for your book? Like, it was the locations of places, or what exactly did you research while you were in Nottingham?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to do research for all of my books on site, which has been really just such a wonderful opportunity, because I feel like it takes this sort of black and white idea in my head and it paints it with these vivid experiences and colors. The only one I didn't get to travel on site for was the last bookshop in London, because it was during the pandemic when I wrote it. But I will say that because I was an Army brat, I lived in Germany for about 12 years, and I did have the opportunity to travel to London quite a bit. Most of that was toward the end when I was in my early 20s, and I confess that bookstores weren't really the only thing on my list. There were a lot of pubs, but I was still able to really pull that experience of being in London and incorporate it into the book. So I knew that when I wrote about England again, and it was no longer the pandemic and travel was open, I really wanted to take that opportunity to get to go and explore, especially because Nottingham is a place that I haven't been before. And one of the cool things about Nottingham that I feel like is a very not really English thing is the fact that they have a series of caves out of sandstone, all running all through the city. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a cool and unique thing. And people would actually shelter there during the air raids. And so I got to go and do a tour and see what it was like underneath there. And it was really a cool experience. They also had the very first Boots chemist that was ever built in there, that was in Nottingham. And because the Boots lived in Nottingham, they also had the first Boots chemist that had the first Boots Book Lovers Library. And so I did get to see it. It's still standing. It's this beautiful building with this scrolling stonework and this so cool ornate corner clock. And unfortunately, it is a Zara. And so the inside is like glossy white walls and halogen lights, and it has no soul anymore, but it is still really lovely from the outside. And of course, I took like a million pictures. But another cool experience that I got to have when I was in Nottingham is so lending libraries really aren't a thing anymore. They kind of fell out of favor in the 60s and 70s once the Library Act opened up and really kind of made sure that if there was a large enough community that there had to be a library accessible for people. And of course, libraries were now starting to carry novels and that kind of thing because it wasn't seen as such a bad thing for people to read novels. And so but there is still a lending library in existence in Nottingham, and it's called Bromley House. And they were so kind as to let me go and explore. They gave me a tour of the whole place. They let me stay there and do research for an entire day. I'm probably the only person that has read through those ancient newspapers and magazines in like 3 decades. But it was a really cool experience getting to do that. And they had this giant spiral staircase that went down the middle of the building that's like 200 years old. And they said, oh, you can walk on it on your own risk, but it does wobble a bit. And I was like, you know what? I do not want to be that American that makes like headlines like, oh, 200-year-old staircase broken by American. No, that's not going to be me. But one of the cool things too about Bromley House is that it's been around since the 1800s. That the actually Bromley House Library has been around since the 1800s, and it's housed in a four-story townhouse that was built in the 1700s. Like, to say that it's cool is just like the biggest history nerd understatement ever. It is the coolest thing. It was a really neat experience.
Thank you. That's great. Eden, do you want I've got lots of questions, so I don't know if you've got one you want to jump in with next.
I've also got a bunch. I'm gonna steer us away from history over to women's rights, and then we'll come back to history. But when we meet Margaret and discover her backstory with her fiance Jeffrey, and you alluded to this briefly at the beginning of the chat, but I was immediately affronted to learn that while single women were allowed to work, married women had to give up their jobs, which is the precise situation that Margaret is facing. And it's also the only thing that's keeping her from marrying her sweetheart. And indeed, this rule plays a big role in the book's plot. Can you tell us a bit more about the marriage bar and how it became so central to the story? Why did you think it was that important to include in this book that's about bookshops and community and whatnot?
Yeah. So, like I said, the women who worked at the Boots Booklovers Library really were so hesitant to get married, even when they were in love, because of the fact that they didn't want to give up their jobs. And especially in a time of war, you are basically going to get rid of your job to what? Sit at home in an empty house. I mean, it's really a sad sort of predicament when you think about it like that. And so when I first read about the women who loved their jobs so much, they did have those lengthy engagements. That's where I came up with the idea for Margaret's character, because I really wanted her to sort of be the embodiment of that dilemma that so many women really did face. But there's also another important part, like Eden said, that plays into the actual plot. And that is the fact that Emma is a widow, but she has a child. If there is a widow, she can still work. And when I say that they had to give up their jobs, I mean, these were more of what would be considered like the higher end jobs. So if there were like factory workers, for example, they were not as picky about. But they obviously wanted people who were younger, who had, their dexterous hands and their sharp vision that could last around for, a couple of decades. But if you wanted to be a secretary or a librarian, or if you wanted to be a teacher or something along those lines, then it was a little bit, you couldn't, because you had that marriage bar that was being instituted by those corporations and those companies. And so when a woman had a child left over from marriage, her job was basically supposed to be a mother, even though her husband was dead. And I will tell you as a mother that it doesn't pay well. In fact, it's an incredibly expensive endeavor. And so, people were really just kind of expecting the family of that woman to help take care of her financially. And in Emma's case, where she didn't have family taking care of her, the obvious solution was, well, just get married again. And obviously, like, that's like kind of ridiculous. Yeah, I see you.
Sure, why not?
Like, I know it's like infuriating to even think about it. And so Emma's very lucky that I wrote her husband had contributed toward a pension for her, because not everybody had a pension. And even that pension was 15, it was 15 shillings, or not shillings. Gosh, now I can't remember. So I can't remember the total amount. Sorry, I did research for that. I'm like 2 books of research ahead right now.
It's
so
totally fine. Don't worry.
Sometimes slip out between the brain cracks. But so basically, I mean, this was definitely not enough money to live on. And but she at least had that money coming in, not only for herself, but also for her daughter. And if a man had not paid enough toward that, or if he hadn't paid long enough, they would have been left with absolutely nothing. And so you did have a lot of widows who were basically left destitute. And it was such a frustrating thing, especially because from a sociological perspective, she had done everything correct. She got married. Everybody insisted that she needed to have a kid. She had a kid, her husband died, and now she's a social pariah. And that really was just such an unfortunate thing that a lot of women had to encounter and endure.
Listen, if I had to pick between giving up book selling and getting married, I might still be single. So I can understand how that came into play. And I've had some really interesting conversations with my grandmother about just how the marriage bar and the lack of women's rights at this time is we see it we think we're so far from it, but we're really not anymore,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, it's
We're not.
crazy.
It's recent history.
Yeah, it really is. It really is incredible when you look back on that.
Thanks for telling us that, Madeline.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
very, very interesting. The red jumper. I'm wearing a red jumper in token of the role it plays in the book.
I
Um,
love that. Thank you.
so it does play a role in the story. Why did you choose a red sweater? And also on an aside, do you knit? Are you a knitter? And then also, how much research did you do into the fashion? Because you've got the wedding dress, you've got the hats with the plumes, and that. So just a little bit of that backstory.
Yeah, well, I have to just say that 1930s and 40s fashion is just, I mean, it's just gorgeous. So it's a lot of fun to kind of look up, like, oh, what would they be wearing, and that kind of thing. As far as the red sweater, I really wanted first of all, so I plot very, very tightly. I know by the time that I start writing my book, I know how many chapters it's going to be, and I know about how many words it's going to be by the time I finish writing. And it's because I like to joke that I'm so type A, I'm 12 point Times New Roman font. And it really helps me kind of plot out a lot of those finer details. I knew that I wanted Emma to have a time where she was going to have to recognize Emma from far away. And I'm saying this because I'm trying to gently work around spoilers. And I knew that a red sweater would stand out in the distance. And I also knew that a red sweater would stand out in people's mind. So color archetypes are very much a strong element that people can incorporate into their books. You can use things that are, in fact, actually, my next book, The Secret Book Society, I incorporate color archetypes quite a bit. But it's something that, when you think about a bright red sweater, just the thought of a bright red sweater, it pops in your head, and that color pops. And so it lasts a little bit longer than if I had said, a green sweater. And so that's why I wanted it to be red. And I wanted it to have special significance. And so that's kind of why I gave it sort of the credence that I did. And I made it that she really wasn't a knitter, and making this sweater was truly a labor of love. And as far as me, if I am a knitter, I have actually never knitted before. I did crochet when I was younger. And maybe this is kind of where part of the idea came from. When my first daughter was born, I was the first of all of my friends to get pregnant. And so they were all out partying, and I would be home alone, knitting for crocheting. And I thought, I'm going to crochet a baby blanket, but I wanted it to be really, really soft. And so I call it the $500 baby blanket because I got this really soft yarn. And it was soft. So when I made the first initial chain, it was huge and I didn't think about that because I'm very, again, type A, following the rules. It told me to do that many number of the chain. So I basically ended up going through so much of this yarn, and this baby blanket was like a beach towel. It was really long and really short because I gave up after a while because I was like, this is ridiculous. And the first time I wrapped her in it, you couldn't even see her head because it was just this big bundle of like very fluffy blanket. And she actually still has it. I think she's actually in her dorms right now with her. But so that's kind of my failed attempt at crocheting. It's really the last thing that I crocheted because it was not super successful. Yeah, so I think that's all of the questions.
You mentioned your writing process and your type A-ness, which I adore and resonate with. I'm going to go off script for a second and ask if you can tell us a little bit more about your board behind you and
Oh
how that
yeah, so
contributes to your writing. We've had
so
this
this is
conversation
actually
before, but tell everybody else.
yes. So these are actually my annual goals. And I used to do quarterly, but then it was just too much to keep up with. So the very top portion is basically what needs to be done this year. The middle portion is what is in the process of being done, and the bottom portion is what has been accomplished. And I always joke that the bottom is sadly never as full as I would like for it to be. Story of my life. But at least it reminds me every day that these are the things that I need to do and encourages me. to get them done. And there's nothing more satisfying than taking that little Post-it note from the middle section and putting it on the bottom.
I love it.
And is that all,
Um,
is that all related to the writing or the plot of a story that's
It's a
behind it?
little
Or is
bit of
that all your
everything.
life in general?
Everything. It's life in general. Yeah. But most of it is writing.
Um, I want to go back. We've talked a little bit about books and how books help us through times of trouble and help us form community. And um, there was a passage that stood out to me particularly. It's on page 210, where you write, "In the wake of the war bleeding across Europe, the Booklovers library was crowded with subscribers, desperate for a bit of romance and mystery to wipe away their worry." Well, I know you were referring to the Booklovers library, capital B, capital L there, the place in the book. I couldn't help feeling the same way about this book. It's been a heavy few weeks, and I found myself consistently turning to your book for comfort. And this is a feeling I remember quite well from reading The Last Bookshop in London in the depths of 2021. Um, so my question is, why do you write about the power of literature to comfort us in times of chaos and in times of trouble and concern?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. I really appreciate that. And second, because I'm a book nerd, I have had, for me, books have been such a huge part of my life. When I was growing up, like I said, my dad was in the army. We moved every 3 to 4 years, and I was always the new kid. It wasn't so bad when we would go overseas because at that point it was kind of a rotation of new kids. So there was always somebody who
Right.
was new. The worst times were coming into the States, when you would get there and these kids had all known each other since they were born, and you are the interloper, and nobody really wants to. They'll might be nice and let you sit with them, but their conversations are all these inner jokes, and you have no part of any of it, and it's the most ostracizing feeling ever. And so a lot of my first friends when I would move into these and when I would go to these schools would be the librarians, because I loved to read. And so I would go to the librarian and I would read like a book a day. I think I read a book a day for my entire life until I had kids, and now I listen to audiobooks, because mom life, right? And so it was one of those things where, like I said before, I could read these books and I could find a connection with somebody else in these pages of all of these books. And it really was such a profound part of my life, especially during these very formative years. And don't worry, I did eventually get real friends, but it was always just kind of started with the librarians and helping me find new books. And so I think that that's really just part of what makes books so important to me. And I feel like when I get to write about that, it's almost just like wrapping myself in the comfort of the love of reading.
Mm.
And I get to just kind of sit back and objectively think, what are the things that I love about reading? And it's almost kind of thinking of poetry in your head about like ode to reading.
Well, we as readers thank you for that, because it feels like wrapping yourself in the $500 baby blanket to us too.
Thank you.
All right, you've written some amazing characters, not just Emma and Olivia, but you've got Mrs. Pickering, Mr. Sanderson, you've got Margaret. Are they based on anybody in real life or individuals you discovered while you were doing your research? Just
Um,
wondering how you came up with some of these characters.
The patrons were definitely strongly inspired by actual patrons that frequented the Book Lovers Library. So, like Mrs. Chatsworth, I'm not going to say a spoiler, but I will say for those of you who have read the book through the end, that whole thing actually really came from a woman who went to the Book Lovers Library. And that's all I'm going to say. So if you know, you know. But as far as, with Mrs. Pickering and Mr. Sanderson, and a lot of the other characters, those really are sort of, and this is kind of the case with all of my books. They're not necessarily based on any one person. They're almost kind of based on an amalgamation of a lot of firsthand accounts that I've read, and I've kind of pieced them into a character. With Mr. Sanderson, oh man, okay, so I can't talk about this without getting into too much spoilers, but I will say that his experience, when he starts to reveal some of his past, was a really fascinating aspect of Nottingham that I learned about. And so everything that he talks about really is very accurate, as he states it. I think that's as banal as I can kind of make that and innocent so that people don't know any spoilers.
Okay, so just to go on a little bit further than that, and I know not everybody has read it, but I think the majority of the people that are here have actually read the book.
Okay.
But Emma reconnects with that young soldier.
Yes.
And so I mean, did you look into, did a lot of research on the civilian lives? And when did that idea come to you? I know you say you like to plot everything out and then you start writing. Like, at what point did that sort of come along? That's one question. And then likewise, the part with Margaret's Jeffrey, was there a chance that he was not going to make it? So those are two questions about how when you do all your plotting and that, just because we had other authors that come on and they've said, oh, the characters take a life of their own, they start writing themselves. Has that ever happened to you? And how did that work with these two characters, these two sections of the story?
I don't know that the characters really do things on their own per se. I will say that they definitely have strong parts of their characters that will come through. Like maybe they might say something and I'm like, why would they say that? And I'm like, oh, because of this, and it kind of like unveils a new layer to them. I'm very, very thorough when I plan out my characters. In fact, if a character has more than a couple of lines in a book, the chances are likely that I have a huge dossier on them. I have all I so I actually like to pull real pictures from that time period, which I can never share with anybody because it could be somebody's grandmother and that could be awkward. In fact, my dad came and looked at one time when I was writing The Librarian Spy, and he said, "Is that Bing Crosby?" And I said, well, it's Antoine, and apparently, actually, it was Bing Crosby. So you never know who might pop up as one of the characters in my book. But I do a lot of really thorough plotting, and I try to really work on aspects of humanity. And one of the reasons why I had it where well, as far as like, researching civilian life and that kind of thing, a lot of that came up in just all of my research in general, especially women with the WVS. They really were kind of a jack of all trades. And a lot of what they worked with was helping to offer troop support when they were on English soil and also offering comfort with care packages and that kind of thing. So I did read a lot about, after Dunkirk, when all of the soldiers were coming through and the WVS was greeting them at the train stations and kind of trying to help out with that. A lot of times you did have family situations where, they couldn't get to somebody because of the train situation. And the trains were so bad during that time period because everybody was trying to travel, but the military movement took forefront. And so, with the reason why I incorporated that element with the soldier was incredibly by design and completely intentional. And I did that because I wanted this moment of altruism that she does for her to have a moment where somebody who is unkind makes her feel stupid for having done it. Because I've been in situations like that. And I think a lot of people with big hearts have been in situations like that. And I wanted to give her the reward of knowing that what she did in a moment of pure selflessness was done for a genuine purpose. And I wanted to give her that reward for having done that after being really mean and trapping her with the woman who gave her a hard time about it.
Well, that is beautiful. I think that's probably, I'm just looking at the time. I think that's probably a wonderful place for us to maybe stop. I think there's still lots of other questions that we have to, would possibly ask, but we just want to be cognizant of your time. And we really do appreciate you coming on tonight. And thank you for sharing your backstory on all this. And you alluded to that your two books, this one was 2 books ago. So
Yeah.
obviously you've got a couple of books in the work. Can you just give us some teasers? Because I think you've got some very, very loyal fan base after everyone here who's read the Booklovers Library. So
Oh, well, thank
tease us
you.
a little bit with what's coming.
Yes, I definitely can. And also, I just really want to say too that it's been just such a joy chatting with you ladies. You've had such great questions, and this has just been so much fun. So my next book that I'm writing is still a book about books, but it actually takes place in the Victorian time period. It is called The Secret Book Society. It is about a young countess who's been widowed 3 times. And yes, there is definitely some gossip going on about that. And she finds that women in Victorian England are having their reading materials restricted because it was kind of seen as an evil thing for women to do. They should be spending all of their time being wives and mothers and not being contrite with all of this newfound knowledge with their husbands. So she opens up her library to them for them to come and read under the auspices of a woman's tea, except they don't just talk about gossip and they don't always just talk about the books that they read. There are some more subversive conversations going on, and that's all I can say for now. But as of September 2025, you are cordially invited to the Secret Book Society.
Madeline, when's it going to be available to pre-order?
That's a good question. We're actually working out dates right now, so
Okay, we'll stay
I'll
tuned
have
then.
that soon.
And
Yes.
we'll read The Librarians by the Last Bookshop in London and The Keeper of Hidden Books in the meantime.
I love it. Thank you.
All right. So Madeline, thank you very, very much again for such a wonderful evening. And now I am going to pass it over to Maya. And Eden, thank you for taking time out of your evening as well to
Thank you all for letting
yeah.
me join. And Madeline, it was lovely to chat to you again.
Oh, this was great. Thank you so much.
Well, Madeline, I guess what I want to do is just bless you into the research. I know how much we've learned tonight, but also the gift of watching your process. I love that you're bored in the background. I'm excited for your goals and for us to hold your work and also know what it means for your family to support that and to find themselves as part of the creative process for you. So I want to bless your two minions and you into this season ahead, into the birthing of the next thing that comes, and just want to give thanks for the ways that the many book lovers that are here tonight have had a chance to hold your work and to be excited by what will come next. So thank you for all of your time and space today.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely
Yeah.
my pleasure.
Yeah. And friends, can you believe it's almost the end of the year? And Sarah reminded me that it's been a 4-year journey that we've been on with the Novel Spot and Islington United together. And we've just continued to cheer Sarah on as she, Eden, we're happy to meet you tonight and know you're just one of the many people we've encountered that have been mentored and worked with Sarah. And my experience of being able to walk into the shop and ask for her wisdom has been passed on to different generations of people connected to books and the love of story. So you're one of those. We want to thank you, Eden, for that and bless you on your journey. And I'm sure our paths will cross again. And Sarah, we know you're going into your busy season and discerning each time, like what's the next right thing for the Novel Spot and for your community. And I just want to give you a chance just to tell people what you're excited about and what's next as you say yes to some things and no to others. So yeah, just want to turn it over to you one more time.
All right. Well, thank you, Maya. That's wonderful. Yes, we're going into a busy season, so it's always exciting. And as Madeline's characters know, it's always great to put the perfect book in the hands. And we do have a thing coming up this weekend. We're calling it Mistletoe Matchmaking. So if anybody's free, we're going to be helping you. If you got a list of people you're looking for books for, we will. All the bookstore elves are going to be there to help you match books to all the readers on your Christmas list, and we're going to do it romance style. So there's going to be treats and there's going to be all sorts of fun things going on in the
I
store this
love
weekend.
this.
So, so that's something that's coming up the pipeline. I will announce that, and I've mentioned it to the Islington Reads committee. I am going to be stepping back from Islington Reads with having the bricks and mortar store open 7 days a week. It's been taking a lot of my time and energy, and it was a very hard for me decision for me to make. But I am going to be stepping back from doing the actual author interviews, and that. But I'm also going to be in the background to help Beth and Anne and Maya as they go forward. So there's still going to be the connection there, but this will be my last, I guess, so-called live author interview. But I did say to Beth this afternoon, I'm sure you could tease me to come and be a guest author interview down the road. But I just want to say it's been a fantastic 4 years and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've made some great friends. We've had some great book discussions with authors, and it's just been a fabulous community. And it's amazing the power of books and how it brings people together. So I want to thank everybody for making Islington Read such a success, and it's going to continue to be a success. I just might not be front and center anymore.
Well, and friend, we just want to say thank you for all the times that you have been front and center.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, everybody here loves you and cares and is cheering the store on and supporting it. And we're watching new people continue to discover it as Etobicoke grows under construction and changes. So stay tuned, everybody, for what's next. The same format and quality. We're going to look for authors, and it's always an invitation in the work that I do when I invite people to tell stories. It's to tell a story that you love. And so we hope that that's what we'll bring to you. And if you have suggestions and run into Anne or to myself or to Beth Pollock, then we'll also be looking to hear from you as well. So stay tuned. I'm going to invite people to stay on if you want to chat a little bit more about the Book Lovers Library. And if not, I bless you into the reading of the season and to the year ahead. So thanks, everyone. May the words carry us. Thank you, Sarah. We love you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been wonderful.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sarah. Thank you, Maya.
Mhm.
Bye, Madeline. Thanks again for everything.
Yeah. Bye, friends.